I am Jadea Jackson, and this is Intimate Conversations with the Therapist. So, someone that I love, that's very dear to me, is involved with someone who is physically violent toward her. Yes, she's in a domestic violent relationship. And I would really love to be able to assist her. However, I know that she has to be willing and open to receive help. She has to even ask for help. And it reminds me of the statistics about someone who gets involved in a domestic violence relationship and the history of domestic violence within my immediate family. So I have a background of domestic violence. I myself was in a domestic violent relationship when I was a teenager. My I am the product of a home environment where I was exposed to domestic violence. And the people that I loved, they were also exposed to domestic violence in their home. And the person that I was dating when I was 13 and 14, he himself was also in a home where domestic violence existed. And so there's this unfolding, there's this history of domestic violence that continues. And I'm hoping that this conversation will touch and reach someone to let them know that under no circumstances whatsoever do they have to remain in a situation that is not supportive of who they are. There is no reason for them to have to stay in a relationship where there is any type of abuse, sexual, mental, verbal. You do not have to stay in that environment. I did not hear that when I was growing up. I remember when one instance of it happening, and we were hanging out with some friends, and the young lady that we were hanging out with, the friend, she said, "You don't fight back, but I fight back." So that's what I heard, you need to fight back. And I remember the next time it happened, I attempted to fight back, and that didn't turn out that well. And eventually I did get the message that it wasn't acceptable, but it wasn't a direct message. It was an indirect message in that he was chasing me around our house within the home. And my aunt was there, and she said to him, "Are you really going to do this in front of me?" Because he had eventually cornered me in the bed. And she said, "Are you really going to do this in front of me?" And he stopped, and then he raised his hand again, and she said, "Really, you're going to do this in front of me?" And then he stopped and he left. And that indirectly sent a message to me that it wasn't acceptable. But no one ever said to me as a teenager that you should not be with anyone who feels the need to put their hands on you. So mine was physical abuse. So I had been exposed as a young child, and so it was almost inevitable that I would get in a relationship that involved domestic violence. And I made a statement about men. I said, men are not to be trusted, they are not safe, and they will hurt you. And so, what that meant was, I wanted a relationship with a man, and I didn't know how or what a healthy relationship with a man looked like. And so it started me on this pattern of attempting to control my relationships. And of course, wherever there's control, there's a lack of trust. And of course, I didn't trust that a man would take care of me, or how would he handle his anger, or him thinking he had the right to discipline me as if I was a child or even his child, and he didn't have that right whatsoever. So, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and for October of this year, the hashtag was one thing, and it talks about what's one thing that you can do, what's one thing that could possibly make a difference. And so, the one thing that I am choosing to do is every month, 1 week out of the month, I will talk about domestic violence because we need more than a month a year. We need it to always stay in the forefront. It needs to be front and center. So once a month, I will talk about domestic violence. I will let those who may be experiencing it know that they are not alone. I will provide resources, um, contact numbers for just in case you don't know where to turn to, hotline numbers. There are, and from those hotline numbers, you can get information for safe houses, shelters, especially if you have children. So, so one hotline number is 800-799-7233. Once again, that's 800-799-7233. And in the month of February, it is also Teen Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And a lot of us are not aware of the prevalence of domestic violent relationships that teens will find themselves in. And I, as a teenager, was in a domestic violent relationship. And what was interesting is that no one talked about domestic violence. No one talked about any of it. So it's almost as if it's this secret. But it was happening. I just didn't understand it. I didn't realize it. And so even within my own family, when my aunt was being physically abused, I didn't understand it. And I remember as a young child, my grandmother talked about her husband, who was deceased at the time, but that he was abusive. And she talked about how my mother, um, when during one occasion that he was beating my grandmother, which was my mother's mother, and that my mother took one of those cast iron skillets and hit him upside the head. And she was probably 15 or 16 at the time. And my grandmother talks about she then had to turn around and nurse him after my mother had hit him. And so even then, there's this sense of, well, he was beating me, and now I need to tend to him. And I always thought that was interesting that my mother, wanting to protect her mother, um, did what she did. And my mother ended up being in a relationship that was abusive as well. And of course, my aunt was in a relationship that was abusive. And of course, she produced sons that were also abusive toward their significant others. And they have had sons who have engaged in the same type of relationship, or daughters who are in a domestic violent relationship. So, once again, no one deserves to experience abuse of any kind on any level. That's what it is that I want you to know and understand. And if you find yourself in a situation that is abusive, emotionally abusive, mentally abusive, physically abusive, sexually abusive, or even financially abusive, because there are different types of abuse. Even um, there is technological abuse. I want you to know that you do not deserve this. I want you to know that it's not your fault, and that there are resources and there are people who are available to help you and not judge you, who are there to assist you. It is a process to remove yourself from this environment, from the thinking, from the behavior. However, change is possible. Sometimes we can only change when we have children that are being exposed to this type of behavior. If you think it's not going to impact them, I'm here to tell you that you are wrong. It will impact who they are. It doesn't matter how young they are. As a matter of fact, the younger they are, the more traumatizing it is because it's sending a message to them. So I want you to know that there is help for you if you are. You can contact the 1-800 number that is on the screen, or you can go to the website. It is confidential. Your information will not be revealed. You can get help.